In a world where anything is possible, in a world where the normal and the paranormal reside, Almost Unbelievable brings to you the stories you want to hear, but fear to hear. Join us in the pit.
You have joined the Almost Unbelievable podcast with Katz and Ranty. I'm Katz. Are you there, Ranty?
I am Katz, and I wouldn't be anywhere else. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really, really well today, and I'm really looking forward to today's story. But before we get to that, let's warm up a little bit. No pun intended when you hear about the content. We will warm up with a little bit of a quiz. Are you ready, Ranty?
As always, Katz, with these quizzes, I am definitely ready.
Have you ever heard of a young boy called Sasha K?
I can't say I have, no.
Well, Sasha K came from a small village, which I can't pronounce, in the Ukraine. And a lot of the people who lived in the village around him seemed to be very, very scared of him because lots of strange phenomena were reported to be happening around the boy, including several spontaneous fires. We also had exploding light bulbs. Somebody even claimed that a refrigerator turned itself upside down. But the name Sasha K became quite famous in the area, and it invoked a lot of fear and dread in the local population until he was taken to Moscow to be examined by a physicist. Now, I'm going to use the term physicist a little bit lightly here because the physicist claimed to draw two very specific conclusions. The first one is Sasha K was possessed by a spirit, and the spirit was causing energy to ignite gases in the environment and set things on fire. And the second conclusion the physicist came up with was that he wasn't possessed by a spirit, but he was being followed by a poltergeist, which was deliberately starting fires. Now, the physicist and the story, that's all true, that's legit. Whether the physicist's conclusion is true or legit, I highly doubt it's true. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting that the quote-unquote physicist with science behind him immediately went to two kind of paranormal conclusions as to what the reasons was. I mean, to be possessed, or to have some kind of poltergeist following him around, that says quite a lot. I mean, this young lad must have had a lot of activity around him at that time for a quote-unquote scientist to come up with that kind of conclusion. That's my feeling.
I believe he was really well known. His name was very well known in his local area, and there was a lot of superstition around him at the time. So we don't know the physicist's religious belief. Was he a professional physicist? Was he somebody who was a paranormal researcher who gave himself the tag physicist? Who knows? But it does make an interesting story. But as I've been researching for today's podcast, it turns out that there is a massive link between ghost stories and the startings of fires. The Battersea hauntings, very famous Battersea hauntings of the Hitchens family, most notably as well, 1954, they had a 15-year-old daughter called Shirley, and the hauntings seemed to centre around her. One night, her bed caught on fire. On another night, an electric cooker just suddenly turned on and started a fire. And the more and more that you look on the internet, these ghost stories, and these real fires that have occurred, documented fires that have occurred, the amount of times that they seem to be blamed on spirits, poltergeists, possessions is quite startling.
Indeed. I mean, I have heard of spontaneous combustion. That's been something that I was told when I was a very young child, actually. My mother told me a story about that, about some guy that just instantly combusted. Whether or not that's related, I don't know. But the idea that fires and ghosts are linked, that's a new one for me, that I have to say.
Well, today's guest has a story that maybe might link a ghost and a fire, but not a fire starter, maybe the opposite. But I will let you introduce her, Auntie.
Okay, well, today's guest is Kate, and Kate had an event some years ago now that has stayed with her for a very long time, to the point where she decided to reach out and share her story. Today's guest has also provided some wonderful photography, including a blue orb, which I have to say is very impressive, emanating from the leather chair that her mother used to sit in. But that isn't the story. The story is about a fire, and again, we have images of that. But let's not dwell on this. Let's move forward and invite Kate to tell her story. Are you there, Kate? And how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm there. Hi.
Wonderful. Right, okay, so I'm going to go put myself on mute, and we're going to let you tell the story in your own words, and yeah, take it away.
Okay, so this happened quite a few years back when I was in my first flat as a student. Got home quite late one night from the pub, and I did what you're not supposed to do when you're a bit tipsy, which was put a candle on next to my bed to read by, and fell asleep with it on. In fact, the last thing I remember thinking was blow the candle out, and I didn't. So the next morning I woke up. I had someone coming over to the flat, a friend, and I just had my morning rush around trying to get ready to see my friend, and then came back into the bedroom and saw that this damage had been done that you can see on the photo. It's not a very good photo, but the carpet was all burned next to my bed. There was a fist-sized hole in the wooden paneling behind my bed. There was black sort of smoke stuff, or black from the smoke all the way up to the ceiling on the white walls. So there'd clearly been a fire. The first thing I thought was, my landlady's going to kill me. Yeah, obviously there was no smoke left or anything. There was just this fire damage that I'd clearly been sleeping next to. And my friend came a few minutes later, and I asked him what to do, and he said, we'll call the fire brigade, who happened to be in the neighborhood anyway. And they came, and they all traipsed through my room. They saw this cold fire damage. There was clearly no water, no sand, no foam or anything there. Like I said, just the burned carpet, the burned paneling, the black on the walls. And they said to me, well, how did you put the fire out? Because I explained to them what had happened. And I said, well, I didn't. And he said, well, you can tell us what happened. You can tell us how you put it out. And I said, no, I didn't put it out at all. I just woke up and it was like this. And they asked me a few more times because they didn't want to believe me, and finally left, checking that everything was okay, and called me a week later to say that they'd spoken to some other fire brigades as well and some other experts, and nobody had an explanation for how this fire could go out. They said that they'd seen so many training videos where exactly that sort of thing, that sort of scenario had led to the whole house burning down. He said, usually that sort of thing, within minutes, the whole room should have been on fire. Behind the wooden paneling, it was fairly drafty. There was a bit of crawl space there. So it's not, it wasn't a lack of oxygen or anything like that. I had my bedroom door open. Yeah, and you can see on the photo how very close it was to my bed. So had my blanket shifted a little bit, that would have been on fire immediately too. And this fireman just told me to consider that day, which is on the 29th of February, actually. That was my second birthday, he said, because they said it's a total fluke or miracle.
That's incredible. A lot of times when we hear stories from people, they are things that people have experienced on their own or with a close friend. But to have something that, you talk about the fire brigade, a professional organization who obviously really, really know the stuff, to be there and confirming how odd this is, it's very, very interesting.
Yeah, they were really stumped.
Now, I've just sent the images to Cats on Skype, so if you check your Cats account, you'll see the two images there. And what's interesting is that you sent us a second image of what appears to be some kind of blue orb above this chair, this leather chair. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah. So this happened a couple of weeks later. I was sitting up in bed, and my bedroom was tiny, and it was right at the end of my flat, so I could see the front door to the flat from where I was lying, or from where I was sitting up in bed. And suddenly, it was quite late at night, suddenly I see this blue light on the door. So the door had a glass panel in it. That's where I saw the light. And it was just sort of dancing up and down. My first thought was that somebody was shining their mobile into my flat, trying to look in. The thing was, this house was really old. It was a really rubbishy, cheaply built building. So I could hear literally everything that went on behind that door. I could hear my neighbors opening and closing doors all night or whatever, and I didn't hear a thing. There was no one standing there, but it went on for a good 2 minutes as well. So I very, very slowly and quietly tried to get out of bed, and just as I reached the door handle, just as I went to open the door, the light went out, and I opened the door and there was nobody there. I was a bit freaked out by that because, it was a bit creepy, and it went on for a really long time. So it was a good, like I said, 2 minutes, which feels like a really long time then. And this photo that I sent you was actually in the new flat, probably 2 years later. I was just taking a few photos of the flat, and that armchair used to belong to my mum, who died quite a long time ago in 2001. And I saw this, well, I didn't see it, I saw it on the photo later, this blue orb that was exactly the same blue as I'd seen on my glass panel. So, yeah, that's what that is.
I have to say, I do feel that's important because the fire brigade told you that, in their opinion, they couldn't believe that the fire went out on its own without you actually putting it out. So I'm going to do some housekeeping questions firstly, right? So, so the first housekeeping question is, how much did you have to drink on that particular night?
Yeah, I wasn't super drunk. I was just, sort of pub quiz, took the bus home sort of tipsy. I wasn't really drunk at all.
Okay, and is it possible that the alcohol that you had was enough that you could have extinguished the fire in a drunken stupor and then fell back to sleep?
No, I don't think so. I don't think I could have been that drunk. I certainly wasn't blackout drunk. I was, sober enough to try and read a book. And even then, I don't think I've ever been that drunk. So... No. Yeah, I wasn't falling over or anything. Everything was dry, so there would have been water. It would have been wet at least, if I'd chucked a bottle of water at it or anything.
I never thought about that, actually.
Another question that I'm sure people listening would want to know, and I'm sure you've asked this yourself, but just to clarify, the parts that did get burnt, that were on fire, were they the same materials as the parts of the house that didn't catch fire? Was it the same type of wood, the same type of wallpaper, or was it all the same?
Well, yeah, there was a part of the carpet that got burnt and the part of the wooden panelling, but it didn't burn the whole wooden panelling down, if that's what you're getting at.
The fire brigade, when they come, they were obviously convinced that someone had to have put this fire out because they obviously know how fire behaves and what to expect. That, to me, just is incredible. How surprised did they seem with their body language? Did they seem like almost as if they couldn't believe it?
Yeah, they seemed a little bit annoyed because they thought I was lying. He thought I was, afraid to tell the truth or something. Yeah, they didn't want to believe it at all. And they had a couple of people ask me.
And this orb that you said that you saw a couple of weeks later, that you sent us a picture of it, of the same similar orb that you caught a couple of years later. But do you think that there's some kind of guardian watching over you in some way? I mean, is this the only instance where something weird has happened, where you've had something saved, where you've been saved in some way?
I really, really do believe that, yeah. I mean, without getting into specifics or whatever, there have been a couple of situations where I've sort of thought, wow, that was really lucky, just in the car or whatever, or sort of dangerous situations that you can get yourself into in your 20s, where I've thought, wow, that was close. Yeah.
And have you ever seen the orb at any other time, other than those two instances?
No, not at all. And I've tried to read up on it online. I couldn't find anything really about it because orbs tend to be sort of, see-through and clear when you look online. That's what orbs tend to be when they're talked about. I've never even seen anything like this.
And it's quite clear. It's definitely blue, isn't it? It's definitely a blue orb, and you can see that it's moving in an upward direction because you've got this streak that follows it. And this is what you said you saw 2 weeks after the fire, right?
Yeah, so like I said, I thought at first that it was a mobile phone or something, someone trying to look into my flat. So it looked a little bit different. It was, dancing up and down. I have no idea what else that could have been either. And I certainly wasn't asleep because I got up and I could still see it. Yeah, I was wide awake.
Well, what fascinates me is that I actually thought I had a very broad experience of myself. I thought I'd had lots of experiences myself personally that would be able to explain anything. And what's transpiring here is that we're getting guests on that are telling us stories that just I hadn't even thought of. I hadn't even thought about having a guardian angel. We had a guest on yesterday that was talking about a glitch in the Matrix, and it's absolutely fascinating. I have to say, some of these stories that we're coming up with are absolutely fascinating. So I'm suddenly realizing that what I thought was the bigger picture, I'm actually just starting off on my journey in a very small picture, and I've got to go and explore into a much bigger picture because this crazy amount of stuff that is just coming in, and people's stories, and even things like dogmen and things like this. I've never even heard of them before, and suddenly it's, there's a lot of talk about dogmen and things like this, and yeah, it's blowing my mind. I have to say, is a lot of things are just blowing my mind, and if the fire brigade can't find an explanation for what actually happened on the day, I highly doubt that Katz will be able to from his chair.
No, I'm not looking forward to trying to come up with something for that.
I will add as well that this all happened in Germany, and so it was German firemen who are not, superstitious or anything. They would not be happy with the explanation. So it's not something that they'd say immediately, certainly. They don't like the idea of supernatural or paranormal things or guardian angels. They're very rational people. Yeah.
Wow. I know that I'm going to have to go away and do some serious thinking. Right now, I am pretty clueless about what we're going to say here. Is there anything else that we should be aware of for the story? Anything else that we should take away and digest?
No, I think that's it, really. I think that's all there is to it, really.
So I'm just going to ask you one last question, which would be the fire that took place. Do you think it's possible that it was extinguished due to lack of oxygen in the room? Because you mentioned it was quite a small room. Was it possible that the lack of oxygen in there dampened the flames in some way and put it out?
No, not really, because firstly, I slept with the door open, and secondly, behind the wooden paneling was crawl space, and it was pretty drafty. So until it got repaired, it was actually, I could really feel a draft coming through there. So it wasn't lack of oxygen, no.
I see. Okay. Well, it seems to me like you're a very, very lucky person to have got away without being involved in a major fire, for sure. That image that you've sent me just shows how clearly you were seconds away from everything going up, for sure. But guardian angel or not, there was definitely something in your room. Blue orb.
Yes. Definitely, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I'm very grateful.
Well, thank you very much, Kate, for coming on and telling us your story. We will go away and have a little think about it and have a chat about it. And yeah, your story is fantastic. We'll have it out hopefully within the next month or so.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, Kate, what a wonderful story. And we're going to take ourselves away and have a little chat between ourselves to see whether or not we can find some kind of answers. And with that, I'm going to ask Kat for his interpretations of what actually happened. So, Kat, take it away.
Well, first of all, let's just be really, really thankful that the only damage that was done was to the house, and that our guest was safe. I think that's really, really important that we focus on that, because obviously house fires are no joke whatsoever. So just thank God, if you believe in one, that the guest was safe. And let's move on to what I think about the story then. So there are two aspects to this. There is the fire, which undoubtedly happened and undoubtedly went out, and then you've got the orb. I'll start with the orb first, because I have experience in making videos. In the past, I've had YouTube channels. I've made educational videos for schools I've worked for. And very, very often when I watch my videos back, there are orb-like things in the video. And they tend to only happen in one room in the house where I make the videos. And that room in the house tends to be, if I'm going to be honest, the room in the house that we dust the least. I've seen plenty of pictures of strange images on photography that looks almost unidentifiable, but really, they've just turned out to be a bit of the camera strap over the lens that's been reflecting some light back, or a fly that's been moving very fast, right in front of the lens as the picture was taken. So an orb itself, I know that it was positioned above the chair, and if you want to see the photograph, please do check out our Patreon. It will be on the Patreon page. You'll be able to see this for yourself. So the orb itself was in a position where it looked like it was on the chair, which it looks like a stunning photograph, but to me, orbs are just too easily recreated by everyday events for me to want to attribute anything paranormal to that. However, we come to the fire, and that's a lot more interesting. You see, I'm not a fire expert, I'm not a fireman, but she's had these experts in her house looking at the cause and the cause of the fire and how the fire might have been put out, and they were scratching their heads. By all accounts, they had no idea what put this fire out. Now, I'm interested in the fact that the wood that set on fire seemed to have some kind of chamber behind it, where maybe hot air could rise and pull a through draft through the wood. Could that possibly that draft had been strong enough to put the fire out. I don't know. And if the fire brigade have been in there and had looked themselves and they don't know, then it would be just ridiculous of me to pretend that I can explain how that fire got put out. But what I will say is there's not enough evidence for me there that the putting out of the fire was paranormal, just maybe some very, very complex mechanism involving airflow or something to do with the flammability of the materials. And that's all I've really got. But for me, what a great story. I'm glad she's safe. Just not quite enough evidence of paranormal.
And as for me, I'm just going to echo what Kat said there about how lucky and thankful we are that nobody got injured during that event. So I'm going to offer up my perspective on what I actually saw in the images and take away from the story, and that is that the orb to me is interesting because it isn't the first time that Kate actually saw this. So Kate saw a very similar orb, same colour, in the room where this fire took hold. So the fact that she was able to then see it again on a camera still over her mother's chair sometimes later, it adds a little bit of paranormal to that, for me at least anyway. I'm very happy to know that the idea that the orb could have been a guardian angel, it could have been a mother that was protecting her whilst she was sleeping. Now we know that Kate had a little bit to drink, but it wasn't to the point where she was drunk enough to fall asleep and be comatose. That only happens in Blackpool where I live. So anyway, we only get too drunk here in Blackpool, but obviously Kate was more reasonable with her alcohol intake and to the point where she was able to read a book. So to me, that says that she didn't put it out in a drunken stupor. The fire brigade weren't able to explain a way that this fire could have been put out. The images show that the fire should have ripped through that place and burnt the place down. And the fact that there was a draft coming up through the back of the wall would suggest that there would have been plenty of oxygen in the room. That's one other thing that I did considered the fact that was the room just that small that there was very little oxygen in there and it burned itself out very quickly. Well, having built lots of bonfires as a kid, I can tell you that the best way to get a bonfire going is to give it oxygen. So having that airflow should have, at least, exasperated that fire. So for me, obviously I'm going to turn around and say, well, I think, or I can at least like to think, that it was a guardian angel protecting Kate, and that guardian angel was a mother, and it was the guardian angel that helped put that fire out and protect Kate to continue her life and become the amazing woman that she actually is right now. So thank you very much, Kate, for the story. Thank you very much, Katz, for your input too. And I guess that's going to do for today, Katz. What do you say?
Absolutely. It's been a great story, and I just can't wait for the next one.
Until the next one, we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.